Hi, Robert.
Hi,
We're back.
we're back.
And it has been a while because we had to change the name of this podcast because, unbeknownst to us, there was already another A Course in Miracles radio out there.
Right. But that was a good excuse to change the name because the new name we like better.
We do. So the new name is Exploring A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles radio didn't quite work for our YouTube channel anyway. So I'm happy that we are in this name change.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it did break our stride with recording because of all the things that had to be done. But
Yeah.
ultimately, it's good.
Completely new branding, completely new
Yeah, right.
art. And in fact, we have a completely new RSS feed. So you know that you're going to be getting new episodes as they're released if you see the new Exploring A Course in Miracles art. That's how you know that
Mm,
you're getting the right podcasts. Um, so when
right.
you have to do a search for Exploring A Course in Miracles or Circle of Atonement in iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast, and if the new Exploring A Course in Miracles logo comes up, the blue one, then that's what you subscribe to, and then you should probably unsubscribe to the old feed.
So the fact that you were subscribed to the old feed is not going to help you with the new episodes.
Nope, it's
Okay.
not. So it's going to be a dead feed. And in fact, I need to record a just some kind of announcement for the old feed just to say, hey, move over to the new one.
Hmm.
But anyway, hopefully, if you're listening now, you're on the new feed. And if you're not, look for Exploring A Course in Miracles and subscribe to that. So, we also have, in addition to our new art, we have a new format, which is you and I kind of riffing before we get into the content of each episode, instead of me doing pre recorded intros and outros. And part of it is just because this is fun, this is way more fun. And part of it is because I can't be trusted to do intro outros in a timely fashion.
Okay. Well, I liked you doing the intros and outros, but this is fun too.
Yeah, this is way better because we get to talk about things that are going on in the circle and just it's less formal. So, what do we have coming up now? We have the Course Companions launch for January 2020.
That's true.
Yeah, so anyone who wants to start either the text or the workbook or join us in the journey through any volume of A Course in Miracles can visit coursecompanions.com and sign up for the program there.
And we have our webinar coming up.
Yeah, but who knows when this podcast is going to be released? But
Oh, right. Right.
and I don't know if it'll. Our webinar is on December the 16th, so this podcast will probably come out way after that.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay. Never mind.
but I may put the recording. I guess now I have to put the recording because we're out there in front of God and everyone talking about this webinar. We are doing a webinar called A Fresh Start with A Course in Miracles in the New Year, and it is all about how to improve and enhance, renew, or recharge your course practice in the new year because there's obviously a lot of momentum around the new year and we want to um, rejuvenate our practice. So now I'm going to have to put the webinar recording of that at circleofa.org/fresh start. So I'll do that.
Okay. Well, that worked out well. My gaff actually worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah. You forced me into posting the replay. So I'll put that online. And hopefully I'll do that in a more timely fashion than I do the intros and outros. So today, we are talking about equality. This podcast topic is equality. And my goodness, Robert, aren't we facing a crisis of inequality in the world today?
We are. I think the world has been in that crisis for many millennia,
Yeah.
actually, but it's a huge issue. And before we talk about it from the course's standpoint, I think we should just talk about what a massive issue it is in this world.
Yeah. And we have a discussion guide for this episode, which is available at circleofa.org/13. So anyone who wants to follow along can download that there.
We were talking about different kinds of inequality on a kind of societal level, and it's when you actually list them, it's pretty amazing. You know, you have the inequality between the sexes.
Mm-hmm.
You have inequality of wealth. There's
Racial,
racial inequality, right?
economic.
Economic. There's ethnic inequality. There's
Mm-hmm.
inequality arising from different religions.
Mm-hmm. Political.
Political, international, between countries.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the list could go on, and it seems like every few years some new form of inequality comes into the public eye.
Sexual orientation.
Sexual orientation, right? Which was completely off the map earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it existed.
Where do we go? What's the effect of this?
Well, I think while we're pondering what a massive issue this is, we should also think about it not just on the societal level, at the collective level. We should think about it in our personal lives. It's a huge issue in our personal lives.
How does it show up?
Well, I mean, everywhere you look, there is inequality. Within families, there's inequality, right? There's the favorites, there's the black sheep. In romance, just the old saying about all's fair in love and war. The the idea that all's fair in love is there's a competition going on here, and you're trying to get the person you want and keep others from getting them. And if you lose, then that is a form of inequality.
Mm-hmm.
We all have our social hierarchy, the people that are important to us that matter more, and the people that are less important that matter less. So there's inequality built into the very structure of our lives. It
It is
just
interesting when you hear the word inequality, you tend to think of it in terms of these big societal forms. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking you're right. There's so much inequality in our own personal relationships. We prefer this friend to the other. We prefer this family member to the other. And so there's all kinds of micro manifestations of inequality in our lives all the time.
yes, and of course the big one the course addresses is our feelings of being above others, or at least wanting to feel above others, whether we can pull it off or not.
I know, and I'm not gonna get you too far off on one of our tangents, but one thing I think is important to note here, because it's really stuck with me, is I have challenged you on this topic by saying, yeah, but sometimes we try and feel less than others as a way to stay stuck and small, and you always come back and say some form of it's always about being above. Can you just say a little bit more about that before we go into our points here? That fundamentally inequality is about a hierarchy where we are on top.
Or at least want to be.
Yeah, of course.
So
Okay, but I guess that maybe that's in one of your points
that
here.
is,
So,
yeah,
okay,
we'll
so
get there.
I'm going to exercise some uncharacteristic restraint
Oh my God.
and
We
hold
are in a
on
new
that.
format.
I know, it's a new day, Robert. All right, so we'll hold on that, and then I'll let me be the one to say, we'll get there.
Oh my gosh.
Who are you? All right.
Okay, so as usual, I've got 10 points. And they're backed up by quotes, although I probably won't go into all the quotes. However, they will be in the discussion guide. So if people are curious. So my first point is that God created us equal and loves us all equally. In heaven, we have the same worth and the same attributes and even the same talents and strengths. They're all totally shared in heaven. We are like a huge family of identical siblings in heaven. This fundamental equality includes Jesus. The Course is very careful to point out that we are his equal, he is our equal. So this is the basis for the Course's view of equality, and that is that in heaven, where everything is as God created it, everyone is completely equal, even us and Jesus.
And from cover to cover, the Course is just pointing us again and again and again to that view. And I think for a lot of people, having Jesus be on the level of equal with us is a new concept, because if you're coming from traditional Christianity, you're so used to viewing him as the only Son of God. So, what would you say to someone who's listening who's thinking Jesus can't possibly be equal to us on this level?
Well, I think we first have to clarify what we mean by his equality with us. We may assume that means he was just as fallible and human in his appearance on earth as we are now. And I don't think he was. I think he was, in that lifetime, was extremely highly advanced. What the Course is saying is not that he's actually down here on our level. It's saying we're actually up there on his level. We just haven't realized our true nature.
Hmm.
And then additionally, do we want a God who engages in that kind of inequality? He has a son, his only begotten son, who is so
Favored.
favored, valued, special. And then he creates the rest of us. And apparently, from the get go, we are on a far lower level. What kind of a father would do that? I mean, earthly parents try to not play favorites, knowing there's something wrong with that, even if it's hard to not fall into that. But would God engage in that kind of blatant favoritism? And would a God like that be loving?
Hmm. That's a really good point. Anything else to say on this one?
I don't think so. No. Okay. So my second point is the desire for inequality, the attempt to raise ourselves above others, was the root of the separation. Now, the Course has two accounts of how the separation got started. One is that we wanted God to love us more than our brothers. We wanted special favor from God. That's inequality. And the other is that we even wanted to be above God. We wanted to be his creator rather than his creation. And that's a different, even more like, outlandish form of inequality. We wanted to be unequal with God in the sense of being above him. So both of those accounts of the separation are about inequality. So inequality is the absolute root of the entire separation.
It's interesting that you say it's so absurd that we could ever think that we would be above God. And yet, that's what we think all the time with the authority problem, because the authority problem at its root is I don't want God to direct my life. I want to be in control. And the whole notion of wanting to be in control of our lives is essentially saying, I know better than you, God.
Yeah, right.
Which is a form of inequality.
That's a really good point. The I know better idea is a little microcosm of what started this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right.
Yeah, and this is the thing we see all around us about the separation, where we initially thought we wanted a special favor with God, and now every day is filled with how do we get special favor with each other, and how do we get on top. And so that speaks to what I was saying earlier, where I have said to you, sometimes you just want to be lower and use that as a reason to shrink. But you were saying that, no, this is always about being higher. Now, do you want to speak to that?
Ideally not yet.
Oh, you're kidding. Dang.
Since we're talking about not getting ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean the specialness issue, actually it's the very next point.
Well, then this was just my segue. My
Oh,
very
great segue.
intentional,
Yeah.
pre-planned, very smooth segue into the next point.
Perfect. Okay. After that great segue, let's go on to point 3. Number 3, the ego lives by inequality. It views worth as being essentially worth more than others. At the heart of its DNA is the desire to be special, which means superior to others. And I think this is really important to understand. The ego wants to be, when the ego wants to be special, it wants to be not just differentiated or apart or distinct from. It wants to be set above, not just set apart. And I think the Course makes this clear, but if you look at people, I've been looking at this issue in people for decades because the Course sees specialness as an act of, as triumph, okay, triumphing over others. And yet, so many people, course students and non-course students, will basically say they don't want that, and they look down on the competitive types, which
Mm-hmm.
is, of course, a reflection of this whole thing. It's like, oh, I'm better than those competitive types, which is a bit of a contradiction in terms.
And it's always nice when they frame it as a spiritual thing. Like I'm being competitively humble. And
Yeah, right. And having watched people for years, what I've realized is that everybody wants this. It's just extremely delicate because you don't want to come out and say it. And you don't really, if you're a really nice person, you don't want to admit it to yourself. And yet, what's interesting is the Course knows all about this because it says that it talks about specialness as the essence of our hidden beliefs, the beliefs we hide from ourselves, the desire to be above others, even above people we're very close to, is such an ugly thing that we try to look the other way and act like we don't have that desire or don't have that belief.
because we're loving and humble. And yet underneath all of that is this drive to be on top.
Right. Which is essentially is an antisocial drive. It's an attack on others.
Yeah.
And so we want to maintain the drive while not wanting it to clash with our sense of being good and pro-social people. And so the way to do that is to keep the drive hidden and not even look at it very much ourselves.
Yeah. And part of keeping it hidden is not recognizing all of the forms that it takes in our life. So I think when you come out and say, I have a drive to be on top, I want to win, I think there's a lot of us that just sort of shrink back from that and say, whoa, that's aggressive and ugly. But what we can all relate to is comparison and the comparison traps that we get into, which are a form of trying to figure out who's on top.
Yeah.
So when you find yourself as stuck in that comparison trap, really recognize that this is what's going on at the heart of it, is trying to win.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to overestimate just how basic this is in human psychology. We're all trying to win. We're trying to be on top as much as we can manage. We have to admit that maybe we aren't the very best in the world at something, but we still want to be as high as we can on the totem pole. I saw this thing in a movie, a documentary, where they give people tests and the answers are down at the bottom. Okay. And so people, they look down and they consult the answers and they get great scores in the test. And then the testers would ask them, what do you think you would score normally without the answers? And they wildly inflate what they think they would score, not realizing they were relying upon the answers being given them.
Mm-hmm.
And that just, I think, reflects this drive we have to think we are amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there's also just the drive to survive. And I want people to understand the different forms that this takes, because we recognize competition on its face as ugly, but then there's this thing in us that just needs to pay our bills and live our lives, and then we get out there and then it manifests in these forms of competing with people within our organizations, with our own family members, with friends, and we don't see it. We're not thinking that it's ugly. We're just trying to survive, but then it's really ugly.
I think there's, when the Course talks about specialness, I think it's talking about something that is darker, than just the desire to survive. It's really a desire that
To
says,
attack.
yeah, I want to be on top. And so it's one thing if you're just saying, look, I've got these physical needs and blah, blah, blah. That I think is not what the course is really talking about. I think it's talking about there's a thing in us that simply wants to be above our brothers for the sake of being above, not just for the sake of having food so your body can survive.
But isn't this one of the lies that we tell ourselves in that regard of, well, I'm just trying to survive and I'm just trying to get the promotion. And if somebody else gets bumped out of the way for me to get it, then that's life. But really what's going on, as you're saying, is that there's something deeper and darker going on.
Exactly. Exactly. And like I said, the course does say this is a hidden belief that we hide from ourselves. And you can see all kinds of ways in which we hide this belief and cover it and give it a veneer. I mean, to me, that common thing I hear from course students of specialness' desire to be above or below is just one of the ways in which we hide it. We try to put this nice veneer on it.
We should probably move on.
Yeah. Okay. So, point number 4, the desire for specialness fundamentally shapes all the ego's relationships, both individual and collective. All interpersonal conflict and all wars arise from this drive to be above others. Now, in the CE, there's a quote that says, wars arise when some regard others as if they were on a different level. And then right before that, it says, all conflict arises from the concept of levels, people being on different levels. So the course is basically saying that at the heart of all of our conflicts and even our wars is this desire to be unequal, to be above. And I think that, again, it seems like wars are fought over more, physical issues of resources, for instance. And yet, if you watch a society that's about to go to war, you see something. Something comes out that you see basically at sporting events. There is just this desire for your team to be the victor.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at um, the American Revolutionary War. Which nation is greater? Look at the American Civil War, which was based on slavery. I mean, you don't get more fundamentally unequal than that. And even our misadventures in the Middle East. I mean, it really comes down to valuing one life above another. And that seems to be at play in the wars that we find ourselves in. World War II. I mean, my goodness, you don't get more of an example of the ways in which inequality is at work than that. Trying to do all-out genocide on a people.
Right. And with the Holocaust, for instance, you see this sense of we want to be above, we want to be the victor, we want them to be the vanquished. There was a really interesting book called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. I think the author was Chris Hedges. He's a journalist, a correspondent, and he had been in a lot of different countries that were in the run up to war. And he watched what happened in the culture again and again as that society headed towards war. And the idea was collectively, people derived meaning from the war. So it wasn't just about, oh, we don't want to fight this, but there's a resources issue. And it wasn't just about we value us more than them. It's that we want the thrill of victory.
Yeah, but there's also in the lead up to war, I'm sure that that's at play. But in the lead up to physical violence, for example, if you just isolate cases of domestic violence, the lead up to that is always the dehumanization of the other person. They get to a place where they're a thing, and then that thing is easier to um, abuse.
But how do they get to be a thing in your eyes? You
Inequality.
want to be above them.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. And the violence itself is your demonstration that you are. So, yeah, I mean, at its root, you just see the seed of this in ways that are just so destructive to our psyche and our society.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just, my point is, I think Jesus has a valuable insight here. There's something about interpersonal conflict, there's something about international conflict, war, that at its heart is driven by this desire to be above and the perception that we are above.
Yeah, I mean, so much so that in your quote here, from what you referenced earlier, all interpersonal conflicts arise from this fallacy, the
Yeah.
fallacy of inequality.
Yeah. Yeah.
All. I mean, think about all the things that we argue about that we can't directly trace to this. But if this is saying that all interpersonal conflict is somehow related to inequality, then that's a really powerful statement.
That is a powerful statement. I'm glad you drew that out. I didn't read that part of the quote. It's huge. So we think our conflicts involve much more kind of practical kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be that the practical issues are not the bottom level motivation,
Right.
which is ultimately, yeah, go ahead.
And then doesn't it like boil down to I deserve to be loved more than you?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm worth more.
Mm-hmm.
I have more value. Yeah. And
Mm.
so we need, as course students, to face that within us. And it can be very, very hard for some of us to face that. Some people are sort of more openly competitive, and it's more easy to see that in oneself. Some people are just really nice people, and it's harder to see that that drive is still in there. It's just been covered over and expressed through indirect means.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about that idea of getting to the very, very root of what it is that we're seeking when we're competitive or we're comparing. We want to be on top. Does it just boil down to we think we are more worthy of love? We want to be loved more.
We want to be special. Same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's different words for the same thing. Yeah,
Mm.
everybody wants to be special. Everyone.
Okay.
Okay, point number 5. This drive backfires. For built into the mind is the recognition of equality. Thus, whatever you decide your brother is worth, you will decide that you are worth. When you deny one with equal rights, you will then deny yourself. This is a course principle that it took me a long, long time to notice in the course, but once I started noticing it, I noticed it in lots and lots of places and realized it provided a lot of the foundation for course psychology. The idea here is that the mind recognizes somehow that we are equal, that we have equal rights, and therefore, however I see my brother or however I treat my brother, I will then see myself that way or treat myself that way because the mind, as much as we want to game the system, the mind has this recognition of equality and fairness. So I'm going to do to myself whatever I did to my brother because he has the same rights as mine. And so this whole idea of I'm going to be on top backfires because we then put our brother below us. And then we think, well, he has the same rights as I do. So I'm going to drag myself down in my own eyes. I'm going to treat myself poorly because that's what's mandated by how I've treated him.
Yeah, and we see that, don't we? Because in our interpersonal interactions where we're putting our brother down, we're chaining him to this lower position, which means we have to, it's the jail concept here in the course, like the jailer is no more free than the jailed. In our putting him below us, we have to monitor that he's constantly subordinate, and that's exhausting. And that's that the judgment that it takes to keep that going keeps us small.
Yeah,
And
but
petty.
that's true. That's
Petty, I think
true.
is a better word.
But I think what the quotes I have here are getting at is something that's more basic. The idea is that there's this principle of fairness in my mind, such that if I put you down, because I recognize that we're basically on the same plane, I'm going to put myself down. If I blame you for something, I'm going to then, out of some kind of mental principle of fairness, blame myself for whatever I do that is similar to what you do. So it's more than I think than having to sort of keep watch on my prisoner, which the course does talk about. You're right. It's this thing in me that I don't even know is operating. I think that when I put someone down, I'm going to feel great because I'm above them.
Hmm.
But then underneath that, what's going on is I'll be putting myself down. And then down the road, what happens is I look at myself and I say, oh, I don't have much self esteem. I need to believe in myself more. Maybe I don't have much self esteem because of this very principle, because I denied esteem to them. And then I correspondingly knock myself down several pegs.
Oh yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying now. It's the limited gift to them is the limited gift to us.
Right. Because there's
Hmm.
something in our mind. It's kind of like we all know that how math works, and you don't add two and two and get 12. There's something in our mind that operates on a principle of fairness. So that I say, well, my brother and I, we're basically the same. We're basically on the same plane. Therefore, if I decide what he is, I've decided what I am. If I decide he's degraded, he's a miserable sinner, well, if we're basically the same, that must be what I am too. And if that principle is operating, then we're kind of screwed because the whole specialness thing is based on I'm going to feel better the more I put you down.
Mm. That's
What if I
really,
just drag myself down in the process?
yeah, that's really interesting. And that's the kind of thing that's always at play as well. The way in which we judge our brothers is the way in which we judge ourselves.
I think if you look at your mind really honestly and sensitively, you find this going on. But what's interesting
Because
is,
it's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say that when what the course predicts is that we'll come out of the process of judging our brothers being very judgmental towards ourselves. And then we notice that we judge ourselves. And then we think, why do we do that? Oh, it's because they've judged me. I've been put down too much. And then they're in that process. I put them down for judging me so much, dragging my self esteem down. And then the whole thing just continues. We need to say, oh, I judge myself. Maybe that's the results of me judging them.
Yeah, because it's really a fundamental insecurity that I think causes us to want to be on top, right? So we're just trying to get on top in part because we have this ego, we the ego is very dark and whatnot. But the way that we think about it is we are insecure. And so therefore we want to put ourselves on top to establish some position of power. But the insecurity itself is what you're talking about here in this point is if I saw my brother as being completely equal with me, then that and of God in an equal way, then I wouldn't be so insecure because I would be seeing myself that way. It's the gift to me that is
Right.
the gift to him. But
Right.
it's the insecurity that's driving our desire for dominance,
It is, I think, and it's also the fact that the ego is just at its root. It not
attacking.
only is weak and insecure at its root, but at its root, it's attacking
Hmm.
and it's dominating.
I
All
know.
that's
I
mushed
keep
in there
wanting
together.
to kind of like whitewash the ego and make it less dark than the course does, but I think what we can identify with in our journey of specialness is these kinds of things: insecurity, comparison, jealousy, um, desire to win. Those are the things that we can point to and say, "Yep, I do that." The darkest part of the human ego about murderous rage and just all out attack, I think we shy away from that. So maybe some of these other ways in which we try and be special and on top are a gateway to get people to look, and then we can get to some of the darker parts of the ego as part of that looking.
Yeah, it is hard to face that in us is something that simply wants to dominate for the rush that comes from being on top, from being the victor. It's hard to face that. We want to say, well, I'm only like that because of what they did to me.
Right.
But
Yes.
what if we are like that without any real provocation? What if we were like that first?
Hence the separation.
Right. Right. So those are all things that I think if we're going to face the ego for what it is, and I think if we're going to really see the world and why it's so messed up, we have to be willing to look at that. Because to me, this has unveiled a lot about the workings of the world. Why is there so much conflict? Why is there so much animosity? Why is there so much war? It's because we're all carrying out this program inside ourselves that says, I must be on top, I must dominate.
I know. It's far more than just nice people out in the world trying to get their piece of the pie, isn't it? Otherwise, we wouldn't see so much destruction over the course of human history.
And the things we do to each other
I know.
are unbelievable. Why are
Truly.
we okay with doing those things? Okay, let's go on. Point number 6. Because everyone is equally worthy, we need to love everyone equally. We need to give everyone one equal gift, full appreciation. And this is based on a quote from chapter 6 in the text. Only one equal gift can be offered to the equal sons of God, and that is full appreciation. Now, this sounds right, it sounds spiritual and uplifting, but if you think about it, it's absolutely revolutionary to give every single person full appreciation, the same measure of total appreciation.
High bar.
Right. And that would change our lives. That would change the world, that single thing, because we are personally, as we said at the start, totally into inequality. Right.
Yeah,
We're
because
constantly judging who gets how much appreciation.
right, our appreciation is so conditional, and just the fact that it is conditional is at the root unequal.
Right. And I guess what I want to say is it's unequal because that's the ego's DNA. It's
But,
just all about inequality.
but Robert, what would you say to the person who's listening who's like, okay, well, am I supposed to appreciate the child abuser as much as I appreciate my mother, who, let's say, was amazing? That it just feels like there is something unfair about that. And so, how would you address that from a course perspective?
Well, ultimately, what the Course is saying is that our appreciation is based not on their position in their position in our lives, not on how they've treated us, not on their behavior generally. It's based on how God created them. And God created them as his perfect son. And so ultimately, we're meant to have our feeling towards someone based on that, not based on the things on the surface. So yeah, we are meant to appreciate the person, the criminal, the abuser, as much as our mother. That's not something we're going to do tomorrow. Unwinding all this inequality is going to take a long time. But ultimately, that's where we're heading, where we look at everybody with a kind of appreciation that is beyond our current comprehension, because it's based on them being perfect sons of God.
And as a society, if we want people to heal, they heal in the presence of our appreciation far more than they heal in the presence of our judgment. But
Which
I feel
is
like
true.
I'm getting ahead of myself there.
No, that's a good point. I mean, what actually works?
What works?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so point number 7, This ultimately means disregarding differences between strangers and loved ones. On a content level, our social circles collapse. Everyone is now in our inner circle. Everyone is in our inner circle. This is the thrust of the course's teaching on special relationships. Now, this obviously, to collapse our social circles so that we have one inner circle and everybody's in it, I mean, that is so radical. It's hard to imagine what that would even look like. Goes so against the entire structure of our personal lives and of society. It's mind-blowing. But I think, first of all, before we get to the course's teaching, I think that's what Jesus stood for. A lot of his teachings and parables are about this collapse of our personal social circles, so that the stranger, the enemy, the attacker, the person who's, from a hated ethnic group that our ethnic group hates, again and again in his teachings, you see him asking us to treat that person at the outside of our social circles as if they were all the way inside. And it's a revolutionary idea. I think that is quite possibly what got him killed, because that disrupts one's society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that not long after he was killed, even his own followers lost track of the centrality of that message. I think they kept it because Christianity, to some degree, Christianity grew in its early centuries to a large degree because they took care of the people who were low on the totem pole. They were known as people who cared for those who were down on the social hierarchy. At the same time, while they retained that value of his, they didn't keep it front and center as this is what he was all about. They exchanged that for, well, he was all about, himself as a divine being who died for our sins. But still, I mean, I think this is radical, and this is what he stood for, and what the Course stands for. The whole teaching on special relationships is that we should love everyone equally.
Okay. I have a couple different threads I want to go on.
Yeah.
One is that hierarchy that Jesus disrupted that got him in so much trouble is very much at play here today. I mean, so much of where we go wrong societally is in the preservation of that hierarchy. Part of their drive to be special is to get to the top of that. And when you're at the top of that, you have your place, and your place is assured. And the actions that you take are to cement that place. So that's number one. We haven't changed all that much from Jesus's time, which means we haven't really.
I think we've gotten a little bit better, but human society is based on that hierarchy. And so we're still a human society. I think we've progressed a little bit since Roman times, but yeah, we're still in it.
Yeah, we've gotten a little bit better, but I mean, here in America, we didn't even get the Voting Rights Act until 1965. I mean,
yeah,
that was in your lifetime. But I mean, just think about that.
And women couldn't vote till what, 1918?
Yeah, I mean, but really, like, just think about that. U.S. citizens weren't equal in their ability to vote until 1960. Well, they're still not equal now, but that's a whole other podcast.
Right.
But so how much have we really advanced in terms of that social hierarchy since Jesus's day?
Yeah.
Anyway, but the second, I'm sorry,
and the examples abound. They just absolutely abound. I mean, I think about Alan Turing, who was an absolute genius. He was one of the inventors of the computer. He saved some with his basically proto-computer that broke codes in World War II. He saved like over 1 million lives through the shortening of the war, and he was criminalized for being homosexual and committed suicide. And it's just amazing that the forms of inequality that have been there and that persist to this day are astonishing.
Doesn't that show you how small we can be as humans? That you have somebody who saved countless lives, and he gets criticized for his sexual orientation.
Yeah, and taken to court.
Yeah. So There's so much to say on hierarchy because it's just at the root of so much of our societal problems is the preservation of this hierarchy and who's on top. And I think of so much of what we're seeing right now that is in the polarization of our politics and whatnot stems from there's an old guard who's very used to being on top and is diminishing in power because of increased diversity and is just resorting to underhanded tactics to bring other people down and preserve their own power. And that is creating the toxicity and the dysfunction that is spread through our politics, that is spread through our world. I know it's nothing new, but it just seems to be what is new is that old guard is being toppled, and we're just seeing the effects of the toxic effects of what happens when someone grasps so incredibly tightly to maintaining their place in the top of that hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. As we're talking, I think that there are a couple things that the Course is asking us to do on this level. One is to face the drive in ourselves to be on top, and which, you know, it's easy to not do if we're looking at somebody else's like really naked, like extreme drive. But we still have to face it in ourselves. And the other is the Course is asking us to strive for this kind of radical equality where the stranger is your dear brother just as much as your dear brother or your mother or your father or your child. And yes, it's a journey to get there, but what if we could stand for that in the world? What a beautiful thing.
I know. One thing I really appreciate about you, Robert, is that you are constantly, whenever I try and project something onto some large, massive group of people, um, you're always pointing back to, yeah, but that's in play in you. And I think that's really important for all of us to see, because it's very easy to sit back and become disillusioned at the way society is going. But as Marianne Williamson always says, a society is nothing more than a collection of individuals. So we have to get this right at the individual level if we ever hope to transform our societies in the way that will create true
Yeah,
global healing.
it's true. And I mean, of course, I see it out there just like you do. And of course, my jaw hangs open frequently. Like, I just can't believe how people cannot even try to cover it up in certain ways out there, you know?
Yeah, I know. It's like with these flagrant forms of inequality, and people are just, here I go again, like projecting it out. But
It's
they're
out
just like,
there.
yeah, what of it? You know, yeah, I'm gerrymandering. What of it?
Yeah. I mean, it's out there at the same time. Unless we face it in here, how much can we really dissolve it in the world?
Yeah. Okay. I feel like we have been on this
Okay.
point for real. No, but I don't want to move on. I don't want to move on
Okay.
just yet, because in your last sentence here on point 7, you say, this is the thrust of the course's teachings on special relationships. So, how does that square with the course's teachings on holy relationships, which are, I mean, if you're in a holy relationship, you're with one other person. And how is that not a form of inequality if you're with that person at the exclusion of others?
It's a good question. I was just thinking about that today, actually. First of all, the term special relationships is an implicit criticism of loving people specially. That's the whole criticism in the course. It's the whole reason special relationships are of the ego. You single people out for your love, and therefore you're not loving others or not loving them as much. So, how does holy relationships as a concept not reproduce that? Uh, First of all, I think it holy relationships have elements of specialness in them, but they're the birthplace of true equality. So we learn with that one person a kind of a joining and a kind of equality that doesn't exist anywhere else on this earth. And that equality, once born, is meant to go out from that relationship. So those two then are usually given some kind of special function, and their special function is essentially one of extending the love, the joining, the equality that's established between them to others. And then in the process, they learn to love others the way they love each other. It's overnight. We have to go from specialness to true holiness. And the holy relationship is a key way in which we do that. In that relationship is the birthplace of total equality, which has to go through a process of being born, growing up.
Okay, I lost you for a minute there, but I think we got your point about holy relationships being used as a laboratory in some sense for the perspective that we're to have with everyone. Is that right?
Right. They're like the birthplace of true equality. It happens first with the two people, and then it spreads out from there to where the equality they experience between them, they then experience with others as well.
That's a beautiful line. The birthplace of true equality, coming from something that on the surface could seem exclusive.
Yeah, and actually, if people are interested in reading about this, the very first section in chapter 22 in the text is all about that.
What's it called?
I think it's called The Undoing of Differences in the CE.
Nice. Okay. Point 8.
Point number 8. Equality is the content of the miracles we give. The essence of those miracles is the recognition of the receiver's equality with us. Now, this is something that is a pretty important theme in chapter 1 in the text. The idea there is we're meant to be miracle workers, and we give miracles in the sense of we give expressions of love to other people and those expressions of love heal those people in mind and perhaps even in body. Okay. So what we're doing is we're expressing love, but that love is also the recognition of equality. And I just have a few quotes here I wanted to read because this is such an important idea. So these are all from chapter 1 in the CE. It, meaning the miracle, does this, it saves time, by the underlying recognition of perfect equality and holiness between doer and receiver on which the miracle rests. So the source of that outer expression that he's calling the miracle is the underlying recognition of perfect equality. Interestingly, I just looked up today the phrase perfect equality in the Course.
Mm-hmm.
That exact phrase occurs 6 times in the Course.
Oh.
Okay, the second one says, the miracle, on the other hand, is a sign of love among equals. Same idea. And finally, since it contains nothing but an acknowledgement of equality and worth, all parts, meaning all miracles, are equal. So the miracle contains nothing but an acknowledgement of equality and worth. And what this says to me is if you're trying to be a miracle worker in the sense of giving someone love in the form they need, very often it's easy to look down on the person for being in need. Right? So we need to say instead, no, the gift within my giving behavior is this perception of equality and holiness and worth. And if I see you beneath me, that undercuts my ability to help you.
I feel myself getting emotional on this point. And even when I read the discussion guide before we hit record, I welled up on this one. And I just think there's something so, oh my God, I'm going to cry. I think there's something so incredibly beautiful about the Course's view of healing, like true, like physical healing, coming from, first and foremost, the healer's view of perfect equality. I mean, that just gets me every time, because we think about, another thing that I've come back to you on is, well, can't we just heal by being a healing presence in the world? And you'll always say, no, the Course, yes, that's part of it, but the Course is really talking about physical healing, and that starts, whether you can heal someone physically, starts with viewing them as completely perfect and equal in your mind.
Yeah.
It's amazing that the root of healing comes down to equality, perfect equality.
Isn't it? It's such a beautiful idea. I think because it's so egoless.
Like it's so egoless that it actually has the power to heal.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. There's a great book out there called How Can I Help by Ram Dass.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all, so much of the book is about how being a helper seems to entail this hierarchy where you're above the one you're helping.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that very sense of aboveness totally undermines your ability to truly help.
Yeah, and you even have in your quotes in the back of this discussion guide, which I'll share with everyone, the Course's idea that all of our abilities that we use to get on top should be used instead to equalize instead of excel.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that as a concept too. I'm going to use the skills that I have to lift my brother versus lift myself.
Even though
Create
I
some
developed the
balance.
skill to lift myself above.
Yeah.
Like I got the skill with the drive to be above. Now I'm going to take the skill and use it for the opposite, which is also a beautiful idea.
Like what a concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
Using your skills to equalize versus excel.
Yeah.
All right, we need
The
to
Course gets,
move
I
on
know
before
we
I
need to go
really start
on.
crying.
Yeah. But the Course gets so much about what's wrong and about
How to
what
fix it.
allows us to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Point number 9. There should be an inequality of ability and development between teacher and pupil, therapist and patient. But they come together in order to abolish that inequality and make manifest the underlying equality. This is a point made early in the text, in the CE at least, and also in to some degree in the psychotherapy supplement. It seems like, well, if we're all equal, there shouldn't be a teacher and a pupil. There shouldn't be a therapist and a patient. And what he's saying is, no, it's good that someone currently has more ability and has developed further, because then they can give that as a gift to someone else who will then benefit from that. And so that the receiver benefits and the giver benefits by being able to give. But he says that whole process that's based on a certain kind of inequality is geared towards ultimately abolishing that very inequality so that both have the same.
Well, I'm glad that you pointed this out, because also at the end of the discussion guide where you have the quotes on equality in the Course, there was a line, and I don't have it directly in front of me, about there is no such thing as leaders and followers. And so when I read that, I was like, well, okay, but don't we need some form of that just to create order, right? And it's not
Right.
about being above or below. It's just about, if you work at a company, you need to know who to point to get a decision made.
Yeah.
And so I'm connecting that to this point because it feels like maybe that kind of hierarchy of leaders and followers is kind of similar to this, where
Yeah. Yeah.
they're temporary and meant to abolish over time.
Exactly. And he does ask us to be leaders of our many brothers in other places in the Course. So
Okay,
we're
great.
meant to be a kind of leader. And yet, as a leader, our mentality is meant to be we're all equal.
Now I'm trying to find the quote where he says there is no need for leaders or followers. Oh, Christ calls all with equal tenderness. That's so good. Christ calls to all with equal tenderness, saying no leaders and no followers, and hearing but one answer from them all. Okay, well, maybe I've got that quote wrong, because it seems like Christ is calling to all with equal. So it's more about him calling than it is about leaders and followers.
But there's a discussion in chapter 31 in the text, section 2, about walking with your brother, not being the leader and not being the follower. So it can sound from that section alone like any form of leadership is being denied, and yet other places in the Course openly call for us to be the leader of our brothers. So we
Okay,
just
well
have
then
to.
how do you be the leader of your brother without some form of inherent inequality in that?
I think this point is addressing that, right? The leader should have more ability, should ideally be more developed, but he's leading to bring others up to his level or her level. So the inequality is abolished and the underlying equality is made manifest. So there has to be a way in which you lead in recognition of a certain kind of inequality, but you lead recognizing that there's equality beneath that, and that through your leadership, that underlying equality will come to the surface.
And isn't that what great leadership is anyway? It's creating a space that brings forth the gift of others. So it really goes back to that, using your leadership skills to equalize versus excel, because
Yeah.
inherent in that, bringing forth the gifts of others is creating more equality.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole issue around course-based leadership that we could do another podcast on.
Oh, we will.
Yeah. Okay. So the 10th point and final point is equality is the reason behind the first principle of miracles. There is no order of difficulty in miracles because everyone is equally deserving of being healed. So the Course mentions a few times that the reason that every problem is equally easy to heal with a miracle is because every person that has the problem is equally deserving of being healed. So this kind of loops back to, I think, point number 8, which is that there's something at the heart of miracles as expressions of love. There's something at their heart having to do with equality, right? If we're giving miracles, we're giving equality. We're recognizing equality. We're saying silently, you're my equal.
And therefore, I'm healed. Because
Right.
what we were saying before about we can't receive it unless we give it.
Right. It's very
So it's
easy to
healing
think,
another and healing ourselves at the same time.
yeah, yeah, healing ourselves of that ancient desire that started the whole separation.
Hmm.
I'm just thinking about the whole concept of being a miracle worker. Being a miracle worker sounds like you are superior to the miracle receiver, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you're really giving miracles, the essence of what you're giving is that statement, you're my equal.
That's incredible, isn't it?
I think what I'm left with after we've been talking about this is just this is like the beauty of what the Course wants to do. It really, really wants us to overturn this ancient impulse in us to be on top and truly replace that with perfect equality.
And doesn't that feel like something that we should not just listen to something like this or read the Course and say, okay, that sounds very lovely, but isn't it something that we should actually take a stand for in the world?
No, nah.
To
Well,
be
Jesus
that
did.
light. Yeah. It takes courage, because look what happened to him as a result. It takes it,
Yeah,
it the old order isn't going to disrupt itself, right? And if the
right.
old order is rooted in inequality, then it needs to be disrupted by miracle workers and light workers that look around at the inequality that we see in countless forms and say, this is wrong. And so I don't know exactly what that looks like. I think it looks different for maybe everyone, but I would, it's just hitting me that this is so much more than a beautiful concept. It is something that we should actually go out there and take a stand for.
It is. It's the basis for a whole new world. A world of equals would be a completely radically new world.
Yeah. It would. It would. I mean, just think, I don't want to get too political, but just think about the inherent inequality in saying you can separate those families at the border, but just don't touch mine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's so much we could discuss along these lines, and perhaps we will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't want to wind myself up on that too much. But the point is everyone is equally deserving of our love because God loves everyone equally, and that's how we can love as God loves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such an inspiring vision. And it's especially inspiring if we challenge that desire to be special and replace it with this vision.
Mm. Amazing. Anything else?
I think that's all for me.
Okay. All right. Well, I will see you next time, Robert. And hopefully, the distance between recording this podcast and another one won't be as great as the one before. It's good to be here with you again.
It is good. Yeah.
All right. Bye for now.